For those of you, who do not know, the webinar is an outgrowth of the AIP Team Up report, The Time Is Now, Systemic Changes to Increase African Americans with Bachelor's Degrees in Physics and Astronomy. And in this report, we had several findings and recommendations, all organized under 5 key factors that contributed to the success or the lack of persistence for African Americans in physics and astronomy. Those key factors are belonging, physics identity, academic support, personal support, and leadership and structures. Now, with this webinar series, we are aiming to explore these team up factors more deeply and to unpack some of the concepts that we touched on in the team up report more fully. We're endeavoring to educate the community and the larger society about the experiences of African Americans in physics, astronomy, and related STEM fields. And we want to highlight systemic issues in those spaces. But most of all, and probably most importantly, we want to inspire positive action and systemic change in support of the goal of increasing the numbers of African Americans students earning degrees in physics and astronomy. Now, as mentioned, today's webinar is exploring the factor of belonging through the lens of African American women in physics and astronomy, and what critical race theory and Black feminist scholars tell us, like Audre Lorde and Patricia Collins and Kimberly Crenshaw. They tell us that at a minimum, Black women exist at the intersection of race and gender, and that our experiences can be uniquely different from those of non-Black women and Black men. So today, we are going to hear from Dr. Jami Valentine Miller, Dr. Kelly Nash, and Ms. Jessica Harris, 3 amazing, dynamic Black women about their experiences in physics and astronomy, how they've navigated feeling like they belong or not feeling like they belong in those spaces, and how those experiences have shaped how they move in the world today. But first, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host and colleague, Dr. Thomas Searles, to talk more about belonging.
Okay, thank you, Arlene. And thank you all so much for joining in this very important topic. So to give you an idea a little bit more with respect to Black women in physics, so Black women account for greater than 60% of all African-American enrollments in undergraduate education. However, they only account for less than 1% of all bachelor's degrees awarded in physics to women. And as a comparison, in 2018, there were only 49 Black women that were awarded bachelor's degrees in physics. And that's juxtaposed against the 160 or so Black men that were awarded degrees in physics. So there's a gender inequality of around 3 times just with respect to Black students in physics. As you all are aware, the Team Up report is a fantastic document with recommendations that focuses on 5 factors, one of which is belonging in physics. And as a result, in this context, the members of the AIP Team Up Time Is Now workshop organizing committee felt that we needed to give a voice to this very important topic. And that brings us to our webinar today. So without further ado, we'll be looking or exploring 3 different speakers. And the first speaker will be Dr. Jami Valentine. So Dr. Jami Valentine is a proud graduate in physics from Florida A&M University. That's where she got her bachelor's degree. She also then went on to receive her master's degree in physics from Brown University. In 2006, Jami became the first African-American woman to earn a PhD in physics from the Johns Hopkins University, where she studied magnetoelectronic materials and devices. And then from there, she joined her current role at the US Patent and Trademark Office, where she examines semiconductor applications for phase change memory, nanoscale memory, and spintronic devices. A little bit in her presentation today, Jamie will talk about her organization that she founded for African American women in physics, and it's dedicated to honoring women who have paved the way, inspiring future physicists, and connecting with people interested in promoting diversity and inclusion in physics. That said, Jamie enjoys spending her time as a motivational STEM speaker and is the National Diversity Committee Chair for American Mensa. Something that's also missing is Jamie is a member of the workshop, I'm sorry, not the workshop organizing committee, but she's a member of the APS Committee on Minorities, where I have the pleasure of serving with Jamie in that role. So without further ado, Dr. Jami Valentine Miller.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Hit the wrong button, I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay, so thank you for that warm introduction. My name is Jami Valentine Miller, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk on the topic of belonging as it pertains to African American women in physics. As noted, I attended Florida A&M University for my undergraduate degree. I went to Brown University in Rhode Island after that, where I got a master's in physics. And after that, I went on to Johns Hopkins University, where I was, as you mentioned, the first African American woman to earn a PhD in physics. At each of those points, I had to deal with, feeling whether or not I belonged as an African American woman in those spaces. Because even as an undergraduate, there just aren't a wealth of African American women in any given physics department. But I found that, throughout my path, I was able to make a space for myself. And I'm optimistic about what future students have because of the, with the internet and all these modernized spaces. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, my career, and then I'm going to switch and talk about AAWIP and give you some information that I think will be really interesting. So after I left Hopkins, I went to the US Patent and Trademark Office, where I'm a patent examiner. My actual job title is electrical engineer, even though all of my degrees are in physics. We're always hiring, so I always want people to know that there are jobs you can get with your physics degree. A patent is a document that allows you to exclude others from making or doing your invention. And I always like to emphasize that anyone can be an inventor. I have a picture here of Gabby Goodwin, who was 10 years old when she received a patent for a new type of barrette because she was tired of her barrettes falling out of her hair. So she worked with her mom and they developed a new barrette. And then all the way on the right, you can see what an actual patent document looks like if you were to look up the patent for her barrettes. So, but let me backtrack a little bit, because when I was at Hopkins, I definitely felt a sense of isolation. There were two other Black grad students who were there while I was there, but they left and under less than ideal circumstances. So by the time I got ready to get finished, I was the only one there. And so three things, well, let me give you a little information on AAWIP. So I started AAWIP because I felt this sense of isolation. It's a nonprofit that celebrates and brings together and supports Black women in physics, and also those of different gender expressions. We welcome everybody. There are fewer than or on the verge of 100 African American women who've ever received a PhD in physics, and also we're a resource for people who want to increase diversity in physics. But I want to talk a bit about the creation of AAWIP. So around 2004, I attended the March meeting. I also attended an NSBP meeting, and I was lucky enough to go to the Aawip conference, the International Conference on Women in Physics. And so through these experiences, I actually met a number of African American women in physics. Because if you're at, the March meeting, you can pretty much pick out when you see another Black woman in physics and just go over and start talking to them. So I started to keep track of all these people that I met. And then I wrote it down in an Excel spreadsheet like a good physicist should. And eventually I published that, and I continued to streamline and get more information. And so it's evolved into this organization where we're able to do so many more things. So these are some examples of things that we do right now. But I think the most important one is the first one, and it's that virtual community that we have, because most of the graduate students and the undergraduate students are still the only African American woman in their department. But we have these online spaces now where they can find a community, where they can talk to somebody else who is worried about getting their braids done and passing quantum mechanics and understands like kind of what they're going through. But these are a number of the things that we do. So I mentioned that the number was around 100, and people ask, well, why is the number so low? So since this is an AIP talk, I have pulled some AIP data. We do not have, at least I have not seen the data that is on the intersection of being an African American and also being in physics, but I do see the data on the disparity between women and men, and also the disparity between African Americans and people of people in the majority. So both of those numbers are very low, to say the least. And so that's why when you look at them at the intersection, the numbers are so small that the NSF has declined to report the data because it would be identifying, at least in the last report that I saw. So, but there is good news. This year, 2021, we expect to finally surpass 100 African American women with PhDs in physics. The number for those in astronomy is still low. It's around 20. It might be, it's less than 25. So here we're talking about degrees that are granted in the US in departments that are either physics, astronomy, physics and astronomy, astrophysics. So part of the challenge is that there's no obligation for departments to report when they have an African American woman graduate. Some do, most don't. So we have to do some detective work a lot of times just to cold call departments and try to figure out where the people are. But wait, there's more. Some people earn their physics degrees in other countries, like Dr. Chanda Prescott Weinstein. Some people do physics, but have degrees in other fields, like Dr. Renee Horton, whose degree is in material science. And also Dr. Tabitha Dobbins, her degree, I believe, was in material science, but she's a physicist. She's you know, on the leadership team for the African Light Source, and she worked with the AIP Team Up Task Force. And then we have Fabian Bastian, who did her PhD at Vanderbilt through the physics department, but all of her research is on astronomy, and she's a professor of astronomy. So it kind of makes it difficult to collect the data in an organized way because you have these different variables. So these 4 people would not count in, Fabienne would count, but the other 3 would not count in this 100 number of people who are getting PhDs in physics. But we celebrate and we welcome all of those who identify as physicists, but we try to also keep track of that data. Here's some information on one of the very first African American women to receive a postgraduate degree in physics. Carolyn Beatrice Parker got her bachelor's from Fisk. She was from a family of very well educated people. I think half of her brothers and sisters were MDs and scientists. She completed her coursework for the PhD at MIT, but illness prevented her from completing the doctoral program because leukemia was a side effect of working on the Manhattan Project or the Dayton Project. So she was unable to complete her PhD, but she was one of the earliest scientists. And she was recently honored with a fellow, I'm sorry, there's a recently, Fermilab has established a postdoctoral fellowship in her name. And so this fellowship will be available to Black and African American scholars with a background in physics or engineering who are seeking research assistantship. So the next thing that I want to talk about, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, is the impact that HBCUs have. And this cannot be overstated. And so I'll just run through. HBCUs have provided the undergraduate training for people who then continue on to do so many other things. So 75% of those Black people who have a doctorate degree did their undergraduate work at an HBCU. Half of the faculty in traditionally white research universities. And this last one is the one that, you know, of course, is most important here, which is 40% of the African American women with PhDs in physics did their undergraduate training at an HBCU. So you have these small schools that are sometimes underfunded and under-resourced, who are still producing people who are able to go out and achieve amazing things. So it's important that we all remain invested in and support the HBCUs. Some people ask, well, what do the HBCUs do differently? How can I replicate what they do? Some of the things they do is that they prepare students for the real world where they may encounter racism or discrimination, and they instill a sense of determination and perseverance. And they provide a strong community. Some of the ladies were chatting earlier about sororities, and I'm not in a sorority, but I did go to FAMU, and everywhere I go, I can find a rattler if I need to find one. I've had people chase me down in airports. So that sense of community is a lifelong thing, and it has an impact. So I talked a little bit earlier about my optimism for the future, and that in part stems from what I see as this community evolution. And so these are some of the organizations and movements that are, excuse me, that are taking place right now, where I feel like the undergraduates and the graduate students are forming new communities that suit their needs in the way that they want them met. So we have, I love the APS Keyword Meetings because it brings together women in regions to learn about graduate schools and careers and dealing with harassment and all kinds of really useful stuff. And it also helps African-American women who are at these meetings to find each other if they're in a local region. The Black in X Twitter community, so that's Black in Astro, which is this week. Black in Physics Week, there's a Black in, there's definitely like a Black in Neuro. There's maybe 8 or 10 of them out there. And so those serve to be able to let people find people who look like them, who share their specific interests. Vanguard STEM is a project that helps to spotlight and highlight people, African-American women in various fields in STEM, but their community is so strong that, I mean, when you go to one of their events, you really feel like you're at home. So I think that I really love Vanguard STEM. The Women of Color Project, this is a project led by Linnell Williams up at Harvard. And what they do there is they bring in undergraduate students and they help them to make their graduate school applications the best that they can be. So they help with the essays and they talk about getting your letters of recommendation, and they have a dynamic panel of speakers come in. And I believe that it's really having an impact on the number of undergraduates who are able to successfully get into graduate schools. Of course, there's the Team Up Task Force, which we can't say enough good things about, and there's AAWIP. And I expect that in the next few years, we'll see even more and different communities come about in the African-American physics community, in the physics community. So that is my time. I don't want to I want to make sure I'm not going to go over, but I will be available for questions in the panel. And again, I'm really excited to be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valentine Miller. I do appreciate it. And I also appreciate your mentorship to my personal students. So thank you for that. So without further ado, we will go to our next panelist and speaker. So next we will have Dr. Kelly Nash. She is a professor of physics and the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs in the College of Sciences at the University of Texas, San Antonio. Her research focuses on synthesis and characterization of nanomaterials and their physiochemical interaction with biological systems, from the molecular to the cellular level. From her research, she was awarded an AFOSR, so the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, Young Investigator Program in 2015 for research efforts in biophysics. Additionally, she has numerous awards for her contributions to science and the promotion of inclusivity in STEM, including the Dillard University Alumni 40 Under 40 Award, the San Antonio Business Journal 40 Under 40 Award, and the UTSA President's Distinguished Diversity Award. She continuously advocates for the involvement of underrepresented groups in science through strategic initiatives at her institution and the broader scientific community. And Dr. Nash has been a proud member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated for more than 20 years. Thank you so much, Dr. Nash, for the talk that you'll give today and sharing your experiences. And without further ado, Dr. Nash.
Thank you, Thomas, for the wonderful introduction. And I just want to thank everyone that was able to join today before I begin to give my talk, and thank my fellow panelists that are here today. I especially want to thank the Team Up project team. I think the work that you have put into this report has been amazing. I just personally just want to say it captures my experience and my reflections that I've had over my 20 plus, career of being involved in physics. And so just want to thank you all for the opportunity of being here. I love today's theme of focusing on one of the key factors out of that report of belonging. For me, belonging is important to our mental, our physical well-being. It's really our connectedness. If we think about it in our social, our cultural, our professional, our familiar ties, all of those things, and particularly, the discussion today around the belonging in physics and astronomy for African-American women is what I'm really passionate about. As Thomas kind of alluded to, so I am a Dillard University graduate. I completed my bachelor's degree there in physics. I have a unique experience, and I have been, it just dawned on me a few months ago. I was on a panel, and one of the moderators brought up that I have a kind of a unique experience. I have my bachelor's degree was at HBCU. I have a master's degree from University of Michigan, a PWI, and I have a PhD from a Hispanic serving institution. So I've been a Black woman physicist in these three different academic spaces. I've chosen the road of staying in academia. I'm passionate about academia, and so but I thought today what I would do is kind of share where I've been, some of what I have felt as being in these three different types of institutions. I like to share what belonging means to me and has been to me in physics, and then also share with everyone just kind of briefly just some of the things that I'm doing now as an associate dean in my college. So again, I started off my career at Dillard University. When I started, I was the only female in a classroom of African-American male students majoring in physics. I'll have to say, out of all of my institutions, being at a HBCU, I felt supported by all of my professors. And so, of course, maybe not all the time by my classmates. It was sort of a boys' club. But, when I reflect on those times, I really think my sense of belonging as a physicist was definitely tested in those early part of my career. Personally for myself, I always like to just kind of share my journey. I probably persisted in physics because I was fortunate and had an opportunity, like many young people in New Orleans, to attend a Catholic school. Catholic school, when I attended, was super cheap, private schools. And so I did my high school studies at St. Mary's Academy, which happens to be run by the oldest order of African-American nuns in the country. And it wasn't until years later that I started to think about and reflect on those experiences, and that it dawned on me, all of my math and science teachers were African-American women. I bet they were nuns, right? I didn't have that kind of shared experience with them, but they were African-American women. They had master's degrees. They had, some of them, I think even one of them had a PhD in mathematics. And so I think at the time, I didn't realize it, that definitely shaped my science identity. It's hard to imagine being in a K through 12 school or even a 4-year college, a 4-year institution in America today, and you could find a a wealth of African-American women who are trained classically in math and science. And I definitely benefited from that. And I think it really supports some of the empirical evidence that when you have people that look like you, with your same or your near same lived experience, like I say, because none of us have the exact same lived experience, but that kind of near same lived experience, it truly impacts who you can become. And so, you know, at a HBCU, I think that was just reinforced by my professors. You know, as I traveled along my career, I ended up at University of Michigan for my master's degree. And so that was my first time being truly immersed in a predominantly white institution and environment. And I truly think my sense of belonging and science identity was you know, at sometimes just purely assaulted. You know, being questioned in spaces about, did I belong? You know, was I trained properly coming from an HBCU? You know, I can even think and recollect about a classroom experience and, you know, being told that I would struggle because I went to HBCU. Now, I'm from New Orleans, so my knee-jerk reaction was, do you know? You don't know the rigors that I went through, right, in my academic experience. I'm here for a reason. I belong here. And, but, you know, I think I developed at that point and being at that first time being an experience of a predominantly white institution, the need to build a community. And so I have to really, I'm just going to pause here and really just kind of thank Jamie for the work that she's done with cataloging all of the women who have African-American women who have PhDs, because I know a lot of them, right? I now play my game of like, how many, when I meet a Black woman who has a PhD or is in a doctoral program, I try to figure out how many degrees of separation from some other woman that I know on Jamie's list. So that's my immediate go-to list. But I think that's what I was developing back then when I was at this predominantly white institution, was expanding that network, meeting other Black women and saying, I can't be the only one kind of feeling this sense of belonging. You know, I have to say, I took a little break from school because I was burnt out. You know, that mental piece was draining. I took an opportunity and taught high school physics back in New Orleans. And that was really eye-awakening to me. And you know, when you get underpaid as a high school teacher, you're like, time for a change, time to get a PhD. And so I ended up at University of Texas at San Antonio, where I actually work to this day. It's a Hispanic serving institution, but part of the University of Texas system. And I think, again, I kind of bumped up on this island of being the only African-American female. And, but I had learned some things from my previous experience of being at a predominantly white institution that I think, I immediately said, I need to make my network and create a space for myself of other Black women to support and reinforce my sense that I belong in the academy. And so for me, when I was working on my PhD, that was definitely connecting with other Black women who were, in other fields of study, working on their PhDs or their master's degree, but it was truly building that sense of community. So that's a little bit about my background, what has shaped me. I've, successfully, got a PhD, and then I embarked on a career in academia. And, for me, I'm passionate about academia because I love the teaching and mentoring side. I view my job, and I went into my job in academia as, how could I emulate all of those experiences from high school and my HBCU experience? I think Jamie said it well, like, how can we create HBCU-like environments at all institutions? That's what I set out to do early on in my career. For me, I was I finished from this institution, so I was the first African-American female to get a PhD, or African-American, in fact, to finish that PhD program. I became the first African-American female in my department. I was the first African-American female hired in my college. So that can be very isolating. And on top of that, I, at the time, was labeled as kind of a special opportunity hire because of the mechanism in which I was hired. And, one of the things that we often see even from the Team Up report, one of the things to combat this isolation and sense of belonging is that we should, value the science and diversity that people of color and in this case, African-American women can bring to the table. So I, of course, I experienced all of the typical, microaggressions. But I want to say I had good days. I always tell people I had good days. I spent my early part of my career building a community with other Black women, other women of color, where we just we propped each other up. So I found women who were in my field and my specific subtopic in physics, and we worked and we really kind of propped each other up. And I'm happy to say all of us, some of them are engineers, some are physicists, we all got tenure, right? It was just many nights of just like getting on a phone or sending emails and saying, okay, I encountered this microaggression today at work. How did you handle it, right? So I think, what I want to say is community is important. And that is really what has kind of kept me going in my career, because at some point I realized I'm passionate about higher education. I want to help students, but we tend to have a lot of efforts, and I think about efforts that were placed on me to change me as a person, right? To fix the student, to fix the junior faculty member. And so that's kind of led me to where I am today in my career. And I'll just kind of briefly touch on that. I do work in a space around faculty. I will say that's half of my job now. I still do research. But I tell people, okay, we're not fixing the students. We don't want to fix the students. Students are who they are. They bring their unique, authentic, lived experiences to the classroom, which is going to drive innovation. And I say, fixing faculty, we're just trying to focus on the mindset of faculty, and that the classroom has changed. The research environment is different, and that we have to bring diversity, equity, and most importantly, I think the most important piece, inclusion, right? You can measure, many of you all probably have heard, you can measure the diversity and the equity, but the inclusion is the thing that's difficult to measure. And that's inclusion is your sense of belonging. And I think that's where I find the most passion. And I think that's where there has to be a lot of focus in DEI work. And you can add justice to that as well, because that's part of the belonging piece. And so, I work on what I call the 3 R's, which are, recruitment, which again is kind of like a number piece. I'm not in retention of faculty, but I think the key for a lot of the work I'm doing is the reward piece, right? How do we break down roadblocks and structural biases that are exclusionary practices in higher education? And for people of color, and particularly women of color, these things are just exasperated. And so, I like to give folks an example. What dawned on me of why I wanted to work with around faculty efforts was because I remember early on as a junior faculty, my mentors were like, oh, you have to be an independent researcher. You got to be in your silo. You got to get grants. You got to do all these things. And meanwhile, NSF and all of these agencies are churning in the background, talking about collaboration is driving innovation. This is the future. We're giving money for collaborations. And, I think this is counterintuitive to what we teach faculty. And in fact, you think about people of color, Black women, we thrive in environments where we can collaborate with each other. And so this is what kind of spurs me in the work that I do. And so a little over a year ago, I ventured on this role of the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. And so I'll kind of pause there because I look forward to taking some questions from the audience, and I'm happy to share some of my experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Nash, for sharing your experience and the important work that you do with faculty members at your institution and other places. Next, we will have Jessica Harris. So Jessica is a physicist and formal educator, science communicator, business owner, and diversity and inclusion, change agent. She has formerly worked at the Space Telescope Science Institute as the Education Outreach Specialist and Director of the SASP, Space Astronomy, there's something blocking, Space Astronomy Summer Program. And after her tenure at the Space Telescope Science Institute, she worked at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory as the STEAM Education Program Development Officer and site lead for the National Astronomy Consortium. She is currently the program director of the Clark Scholars Program at University of Virginia in the Engineering School in Charlottesville. And she also serves as an Vanguard STEM ambassador and commissioner of the Human Rights Commission in the city of Charlottesville. She continues her engagement with the National Astronomy Consortium as an outside expert on the advisory council. Lastly, she is founder of Jessica A. Harris LLC, which is a consulting firm focused on organizational system design to advance STEM offerings and outcomes for traditionally underrepresented students in the U.S. education system, K through 12, and higher education. She attained a BS in physics from Grambling State University and a master's in physics from the Fisk University as a part of the Fisk Vanderbilt Bridge program. So without further ado, Jessica, please share your experience and your story, and I look forward to it.
Thank you, Thomas, for your introduction. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you, AIP, for inviting me and all the co-sponsors that are having us all here today. So I thank you to my panelists, Dr. Nash and Dr. Miller, for their stories. Dr. Miller did a great job of laying out the statistics, and Kelly is talking from her point of view in academia. So I'd love to share with you my journey. And as an outreach professional, I love to tell it in a story. So when I was a little girl, 8 years old, I knew always I wanted to be a teacher. I think because I had amazing teachers in school, and my aunties, who I love and admire, were teachers, or they were affiliated in some way with education. So you asked me when I was kindergarten, you asked me when I graduated high school, I wanted to be a teacher. And my dad in high school gave me an ultimatum. Either I was going to get a scholarship to go to college, that was the only way I would be able to afford it, or go into the military. And I love my dad. He's served since I was 3 years old. Actually 3 days before I was born. I love his service. I'm grateful for all those who have served in the military, but I knew that was not my calling. That was not my purpose. So I worked really hard. I had some amazing teachers along the way who mentored me and guided me. And I graduated high school from Alaska. I know, military brat, been a little bit of everywhere. Graduated high school with over 4.0 and went to Grambling State University. I met this amazing professor in I can't remember, so long ago. It was within my first year. I had to take physics, but for non-science majors, because like I said, I always wanted to be a teacher. So of course, I went to Grambling State University and declared my major as secondary education with a concentration in math. I always wanted to be a math teacher. I met him. He was amazing. His name was Dr. Tang Zhu. And he was the director of the LSAT program. And in astronomy and physics, we use a lot of acronyms. So that acronym means Lewis Stokes Louisiana Alliance for Minority Participants at Grambling State University. And he was coaxing me into, or he was slowly trying to convince me to switch my major over into physics. And again, I always wanted to be a teacher. Being a physicist was never on my mind. I don't have any scientists in my family. But I'm like, yes, okay, you can pay for my books. The program that I was in wouldn't pay for my books. He was an amazing man. He gave me my first internship after my freshman year. I went to Duke University with one of his colleagues, and I'll never forget, I would send him weekly emails about how I was doing, what was going on. And he replied to me once, and he said, I want you to be my student next school year. I plan to bring you to the LSAT. They had an annual conference in November. He said, I hope we can work hard to bring back the first place prize. And I know it's so important, and I believe it, as Dr. Nash has said earlier, that representation is key. Being able to see yourself in the people around you is so important. He was from China. He was Chinese, had moved to the States and was a part of Grambling for many years, but he believed in me. I never thought I was wanting to be a physicist, but his belief in me, him saying that he wanted me to be his student, gave me the courage I need. And I used to always think like, he has this like weird, like not weird, but he has this belief in me that I didn't have in myself that was awe-inspiring, that just pushed me to go forward. And I never wanted to disappoint him. Unfortunately, my sophomore year, he passed away suddenly. And let me tell you, this man was amazing. Even in the ICU, he was giving me a list of internships that I should go to. And I have to say, I'm super blessed that I went to every single one that he wrote down on that paper. He was amazing. But at the time, I didn't know that I needed a champion. I didn't know that I needed someone that really needed to believe in me. And I too, like others on here, have been to an HBCU. So Grambling, if I didn't say, is an HBCU. Both my degrees are from HBCUs. And I saw like a question that hopefully we'll be able to address earlier, but the difference about being an HBCU is I never once felt competitive with my other colleagues. We were all we had. Grambling State University is really small. It's not known for its physics departments, and we're one hallway. So we had classes together. We had to get through E&M. We had to get through thermodynamics together. There wasn't this competitiveness that we had. And it wasn't until I went to Fisk University, a part of the Fisk Vanderbilt Bridge program, you're able to take classes at Fisk University, and you're able to take classes at Vanderbilt. And it was at Vanderbilt that I saw this competitiveness. Like they were guarding their homework answers like Fort Knox, let me tell you, they were not sharing. And it was different for me. I'm like, we're so collaborative, so collegial, I didn't understand it. So when you're talking about the change and the sense of belonging, it's these subtle things. So as part of being I was an LSCAP scholar and ended up being a MARC scholar. And a MARC scholar, we were funded, we were given funds, and they also taught us about just social skills. How do you prepare yourself for attending a meeting? They prepared us for GRE courses. They told us, what do you wear to a conference? We were told to wear business formal, suit and tie. Women, you're in a suit, a top and a bottom. And we went to a conference called Abercrombs. Again, we're known for our acronyms, but it's the annual biomedical research conference for minority students. And I remember going, I was in my suit, I was looking cute, and none of my other colleagues were, none of my other people that were presenting with me, the faculty that were coming over asking me questions, they weren't in business formal. So I immediately got this message that I felt different. There was something different about me. Same at Fisk, there was something different about me. And this little girl that wanted to be a teacher goes off, and she, part of all of these programs too, I would say the MARC Scholars Program was a program to prepare you to go into a PhD. The same thing with Fisk Vanderbilt. It's to bridge you into the PhD at Vanderbilt. And so I was going through classes, and unlike others on the call, I decided very consciously and very purposefully not to continue on, because I had a drive to do the thing that I knew I was meant to do outreach. So I finished at my master's degree, but along the way, this sense of belonging was rising, because I loved my research, but I wasn't as excited as everyone else. We had to sit in these sessions and do paper reviews, and I just never could relate. Like it always was this thing inside of me, like, well, why does this matter to the public? I had this experience, this story I tell often. So I went from this amazing professor he didn't know at the time, I didn't know at the time, he was on his deathbed in the ICU, giving me guidance, supporting me, being a champion for me, being all the things that you want to embody in a mentor, to an amazing thesis advisor who's super talented, who is an expert on the Orion Nebula. I was so honored to work with him. And as part of the Fisk Vanderbilt Bridge program, we had sessions where they would teach us different skills. And one of the sessions were make sure that you ask your thesis advisor for a strong letter of recommendation, a good letter of recommendation. So I'd already asked my thesis advisor for a letter of recommendation for graduate school. So I'm like, I'm gonna take this information, I'm gonna go to him and ask him for a good, strong letter of recommendation. And I was not prepared for his response. He told me I did not have the esoteric skills to continue on with a physics degree, with my PhD. I was devastated. Like, y'all, I just finished my bachelor's degree. I'm about to graduate with my master's degree. I've been with this amazing man traveling to Chile, doing observations, analyzing my data, and he was telling me I didn't have what it takes. The sense of belonging was real. I didn't want to tell my students, my fellow students, because I thought they would judge me. Like, yeah, like that imposter syndrome was rising up. Like, yeah, maybe he knows something that I don't know. I've been fortunate. 10 years have passed since then. Last year, we actually were able to talk, and I understand now where he was going with that. He saw that I really wanted to do outreach, and I was really passionate about that, but it hurt me. So I want to say about the sense of belonging that for me, when I graduated, it gets me emotional every time I think about it. When I graduated, I felt so broken. I knew I was making the right decision. I wanted, like Dr. Nash had said, she wanted to follow her passions to be in academia. I wanted to follow my passions to teach and to do outreach, but I felt like I had failed every program that had funded me. The Mark Scholars Program was to fund me to get a PhD. I didn't. The Fitz Vanderbilt Bridge Program was funding me to bridge into the PhD, and I decided not to. I was devastated. It was years. I'm ashamed to tell you how long it was. There were years that I could not, it took me a long time to build my confidence that I was a physicist. So I went to Space Telescope Science Institute. They gave me my first opportunity. I didn't get hired for the job that I applied for, but I was very fortunate to be hired for a different position. They created a position for me. And I spent years talking about James Webb Space Telescope. And I love the work that I've done. I've never turned back. I think it's so important. And what I wanted to say today about the sense of belonging is that there are so many different career paths. With a physics degree, I chose outreach. I'm really great at what I do because I understand the science. I talked more and gave more presentations about James Webb as an outreach and my position there at Space Telescope than anyone else. And often our field has made me feel like that wasn't valuable. One of the things that was really devastating for me at Space Telescope is like I said, I was doing a lot of research events. I created an engineering club. I was doing talks several times a week, coordinating a lot of things. And I was hoping that one day I would have an opportunity to do a high profile event. And for us in astronomy and physics, if you don't know, a high profile event would be something like AAS, which is our huge astronomy conference that happens every year in January, or South by Southwest, or in DC area, there's a US Science and Engineering Festival. And I was told eventually in time, one, that a friend of mine who was a PhD scientist there, she said to me, like, so casually, like, well, you could just ask, like, if you could just ask for these opportunities, like we talk about them and we were able to choose what we're wanting to do. And I made a really great point to her that I'm never in the room. The other thing is I was told that I would never be able to do a high profile event because they wanted the PhD scientists to be the interface. Devastated. I had done so much time, so much energy building up to think I could do something that I wasn't able to do. So this sense of belonging was different for me. I share the same for my fellow panelists, that even at Grambling and at Fisk University, I saw all my personal faculty members were male, either Black male, or they were international in some way. There was one female physicist at Grambling, but I never had the opportunity that she taught me. And so there's this messaging that gets taught and ingrained in you that you're not good enough. And for me, I felt it even more, choosing to go very left from what everyone else is taught to do. Get your PhD, go into research, go into academia. And so I'm doing what I do today because I care deeply. I'm very passionate about doing outreach. I know from being at Space Telescope, one of the top outreach places in the country, that the outreach is fundamental. Like, I have to know that all of those places that I went to talk about James Webb, that somehow for 7 years that I did that made a difference. Our field made me feel like I didn't make a difference, but I know that it made a difference. And so the other part of this is I was able to lead the summer program, both at Space Telescope and at NRAO, and it's actually the work that I currently do. And that is all because I want to help the next generation of scientists not feel that sense of aloneness. It's lonely. You heard the statistics today. I'm often the only one in the room all the time. It's exhausting. I was sharing earlier with our panelists that there were so many days when I was tired, when I was crying in the bathroom stalls. I was crying underneath my desk because I was tired of feeling these microaggressions. And I say that it's like 1,000 cuts. Like one time it happens to you, like, okay, but 1,000 times it starts to feel overwhelming. And in 2019, I almost gave up on the field altogether. I was like, I don't want to do anything related to physics and astronomy. I'd rather work at Burger King. I'm for real, y'all. Like I really wanted to leave, but I created my business. And my students call me Auntie Jess, which I so appreciate. And it comes from wanting to be this space for them. I'm so grateful for all of the organizations that are working on creating this virtual space for students to meet, but I want to be an intersection for them. I want them to know and expose them that there's so many opportunities. There's so much good that you can do, and there's value. We need outreach. All of this, even this, my amazing picture, my background, it's from Hubble. It comes from doing really, really great outreach. And so I just wanted to close by saying that the advice that I want to give for those who are on the call, then we're talking about a sense of belonging. I want you to understand that there's so much emotional labor that goes in just to being. So this little girl that wanted to be a teacher and wanted to get into physics to be a teacher, I almost lost it, because I was being so beat upon. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I'm tired of telling people my credentials. I'm trying to have to tell them that I have these years of expertise and experience. It's exhausting. Even today, I'm thinking about what should I wear? What should I do? And I had a friend over recently, and I was talking to another friend. She heard us on the call, and she was like, it sounds like you were arguing with her. And I was like, I'm not, I'm just so passionate. So even that, I have to tone myself because I'm afraid of what my colleagues will think of me. I've even been told that I've been the angry Black woman, or I've cared too much about D&I, but I don't care. I'd rather be the angry Black woman, change policies and procedures, and make a difference. That's why I launched my business. I want to make a difference in the lives of students. I want them to know that they are not alone, that they are seen, and that they are heard. So thank you so much for your time today.
Wow, wow, wow. That is fantastic. Thank you so much to all three of our panelists. Wonderful, really wonderful. And we have a lot of really great questions for all of you. One was that Kelly Nash mentioned the HBCU environment being important, and that there are parts of that environment that should be spread to other institutions. And I know that every one of you actually spent time at an HBCU. So can any of you describe the environment that is so supportive at an HBCU? Can you describe that in more detail?
Sure, I'll go first. I was lucky enough to be at FAMU during a very special time where the president of the university made it his focus for a number of years to attract the top, the National Merit Scholars. So for like 2 out of 4 years, or 3 out of 4 years, we attracted more National Merit Scholars than even Harvard. So everyone was in STEM. My best friend was a chemistry major, and even though I had a full scholarship paid for by Livermore Labs, this other girl had $1 million in scholarships. So it wasn't even a big deal to be a great scholar. So having so many different, really bright students around you made it normal to like relax and geek out, you know, whatever it was. So it was an amazing time to be there. And just having that community of scholars around you can be a tremendous help. That's one of the best things that came out of it for me. I'll let you guys talk about those other HBCUs.
I'd like to add on to that, since I have both my degrees from 2 HBCUs. I would go back, it's the community. And I was a part of programs that were geared for underrepresentation, so Black women and Black boys in STEM. So it was very tailored, it was very personal. We got, like someone said it earlier, preparing us for what it's like in the real world. So having real conversations about just, it seems so basic, like you may just know this, but I didn't know this. Like when you go to a conference, let's say I meet Dr. Jamie, like what's the protocol afterwards? Like we should actually meet her, like email her that day, tell her what you talked about, tell her about your poster, and then also provide information about how you should follow up. Like it may seem so natural, but it wasn't natural, but it prepared me of what to do and how to present myself in this environment that I didn't know at the time would be hostile towards me. And so it was, I tell everyone, if you have the opportunity to go to HBCU, please go. It's a nucleus, it's some ways we are protected by all of this hostility that happens. And so even if you experience it at a conference, it's okay, because you can come back home and you can talk about it. I think about a time when I had a disagreement with one of my professors, and because it was so small and like I had a little bit of confidence at the time, I went in so often and I talked about it. And he talked to me and he was supportive of me. Even when I went, this is the story I wanted to share earlier. Even when I went back to Grambling, I was asked to go back and talk. All of my physics professors came. The mentor that I told you about, his brother came after the talk. He almost had me in tears, y'all. I think I was in tears. He told me his brother can now rest because he knew I was okay. I was at peace. It's that support. I know now that if I go back to Grambling, I have the support system. I have people that believe in me. I have people that still talk about me. And just, there's nothing like that support that we had. And like I said, there was maybe 2 or 3 of us in a class. Like, we had to figure these problems out. There was no time for competition, but it was the environment that was created for us. And it was so intentional. It was so purposeful. And I would have to say too, money was there. Each program that I talked to you about was money that was given to Grambling specifically for this purpose. So it allowed it a lot ease. So I want to say that from my personal experience.
Yeah. And I just wanted to
Mhm.
jump in and ask just another question. So with respect to studying at HBCUs, was it always a rosy scenario? Or because if you just look at the numbers don't necessarily add up. For instance, our goal of the AIP Team Up report is to use the 5 factors and give recommendations to departments, all departments, on how to double the numbers of African-American graduates with a BS degree in physics. And in the context of the fact that 60% of our undergraduate population in physics is Black women, then you would think that even in the physics departments at HBCUs, we also have a higher number, but we don't. So are there things and advice as students that come out of HBCUs, how can we do a better job in the context of serving Black women better?
I think that's a great question. I'll tackle that first. And I'm just going to say, like, I love what you all did in the Team Up report, because particularly like that piece around belonging is the HBCU experience. Now, I will agree, having been a Black woman in a physics department, I think my university since that time has had a great champion, who the professor that's still the department chair, Dr. Darwish, is passionate. And we've had a lot of Black women who have gone on to get PhDs in STEM fields out of that program. But I think it's setting the tone, right? Making inclusive spaces for women and African-American women regardless, all of those pieces. And so when I talk about making a predominantly white institution, or even I'm at a Hispanic serving institution, and our tagline now is student success, right? What does student success look like? To me, it looks like a HBCU. It's a family environment. You are presenting students with alumni or even aspirational figures. When you don't have faculty that look like the students, you're making sure that they are introduced to scientists that look like them. And the third piece, I tell faculty all the time, you have office hours. What is 5 minutes of having a conversation with a student who has a different lived experience than you to get to know them? That breaks down barriers, that lowers, that stress, and that sense, it makes the sense of belonging much better for students to get to know them and know that you have some sincere interest in seeing them succeed. And so I think oftentimes that's the experience that's missing. I can think as at a HBCU, I went to office hours, half of the time, or 45 minutes was talking about me and what I was experiencing. And we talked about one homework problem, right? That is an important component that's missing oftentimes when we talk about student success, that HBCUs have kind of captured that experience, and because of their long history.
And I would say too, that caring piece. When my mentor passed away, I was devastated, and I still had to go back to school on Monday. and the care that my faculty felt and put around me that I didn't even know, I forever honor them for that. And I want to say too about the team report, I am in this data. This happened 2018, 2019. It still captures what I experienced when I was in undergrad and when I was in graduate school. That's why this report to me, when I was reading, I'm like, this is all me. This is all my experience. And so that sense of belonging is so important. And to what Dr. Nash was saying, like, just that you care. So if anything today, how can you replicate that for your students? Care. Genuinely ask them, how are they doing? I was devastated to hear one of my mentees is in a program, and she's one of the only in her program. And when the riots were happening and all of this was breaking out, no one stopped to ask her how she was doing, how she was feeling, just genuinely wanting to know, how are you doing today? The work will get done. We'll get to that. But how are you in your heart and your soul? Can I hold space for you is priceless for our students. So that's something that we all can do, regardless outside of the HBCU experience. That is something that we all could do.
I'd just like to add that there is a program that has had tremendous success with African Americans in STEM that is not an HBCU, but replicates some of those experiences. And that's at the University of Maryland at Baltimore County with their Meyerhoff Scholars Program. They really do an outstanding job. I was just reading about the scientist who worked on the vaccine, Kizimikia. I mispronounce her name, I apologize. But she was also a Meyerhoff Scholar. I said, oh, that doesn't surprise me at all, because they produce so many outstanding scholars. So it can be done.
Thank you. Thank you. That was something that we definitely found in the team up report. It was one of our important findings, was that you're right, absolutely right, Jessica, caring about students and asking about them and about their lives and getting to know them as people really makes a difference. It makes a huge difference in their persistence. So thank you for bringing that up. And correspondingly, we have a question about the best ways in which non-African American professors, besides caring, I guess, can nurture and encourage the sense of belonging for African American women in physics.
I'll share a little bit of my experience from my faculty role. So I've been participating, if you all haven't seen, there's a NSF funded project called Aspire. It's a national network, and there's a really interesting piece around diversity, equity, inclusion in the classroom space. And you know, there are some tools there, particularly if you are not African American, and you know, or you're working with a student from a different, you know, background, to really come from a space of knowing where your place of privilege is. And you know, for me, it was awe-inspiring because you know, I'm African American, I'm a woman, I'm a physicist, right? I meet all these little tiny, I'm in these tiny little boxes. But I have to recognize I have a place of privilege even in this conversation today, because I am the third generation in my family to have a college degree. Not all African American families can say that, right? How do I take that privilege? And this goes for everyone. How do you take your privilege and then relate to others and support one another and make an inclusive environment? I think this is one space and one tool we can use.
Yes, and I wanted to mention this. I'm glad this came up, what you said about using your privilege. So I was telling you, I had a mentor who didn't look like me, but he believed in me, y'all. And that was like golden. And as I got through, there was people who believed in me and some were challenged by me, but I had an amazing experience at NREO, where there was a person who believed in me, supported me, but she used her white privilege to give me light. When she was going to a conference, Jessica, can you come with me? Can you present with me? Like, those things are golden to someone who, like, I wasn't early on in my career, but still building a reputation. Like, that is golden. So that's how all of us can do this for our students, for those that were like, even your postdocs, like giving them opportunities. I think that sometimes what we're experiencing is, I know I've experienced it, is this competitiveness. I got to be the top. I got to be the best. I got to do this. But to have someone say, I'll use my power, she was also at the end of her career and she's about to retire soon. So she didn't need that, but I wasn't competing against her. She was genuinely using and pushing me forward and continuing to push me forward. And so those allies, we all have privilege here and using that for the good.
And I would like to add, one of the most important things that the allies can do is to listen to what African American and other underrepresented minorities say. When you ask, well, what do you need? And they reply, sometimes it's, oh, well, we can't do that. That can't be done. But actually listen to what it is that the people are saying they need. I know for me, I would tell my advisor, I need to go to this NSCP conference. And he'd say, well, are you presenting a paper? No. Then you can't go. And I'm like, I need to go to this conference. And so I think it's important to listen, even if it doesn't make sense in the moment. If you don't understand, then ask further backup questions like, well, why do you need to go? Oh, I need to go because I'm going nuts being the only Black person here in the department. So yeah, I think the listening is very, listen without being defensive. It's very important.
Really important to listen to those experiences. So we have a question from Mel Sabella, who is, acknowledges how each of you have talked about HBCUs creating that sense of belonging and community for students, and wanted to know if each of you could provide your thoughts on how to create or foster effective collaborations across PBIs, HBCUs, HSIs, tribal colleges, and predominantly white institutions or R1s that value and leverage the strengths of the PBIs, HBCUs, HSIs, and tribal colleges, and can mitigate some of the challenges or emotional labor of the transition to a PWI for students. So how can we cross-collaborate between minority-serving institutions and predominantly white institutions that helps to mitigate the challenges, emotional labor for students transitioning?
That's a tough one. I mean, I personally have experienced this. I mean, and I'm not going to say I've been a success in all of my mentoring efforts, but, I've tried, when I have students, a lot of my students are Hispanic, they're first generation, and tried to be that bridge mentor to their predominantly white institution, because I can think about my experience of coming from an HBCU to a PWI. It was, how traumatic it was as I shared. And so, I have tried that model, and it's been successful with some of my students where we've even worked collaboratively on some research with the student. And I'm like, I don't need the publication. I got my own research, but how can I know this student has the technical skills and this student has the capabilities. And so I've had like a couple of students who have NSF graduate research fellowship. They wrote proposals that were funded by NSF, and they get to a PWI and they're like, what is this? And so it's like, hey, I worked with this student on this proposal. Let's let me sit in for the first 6 months while the student gets acclimated. And I draw on that because I can think about when I graduated from my HBCU, now I'm going to tell you, I had no less than 5 faculty at my HBCU to tell me, do not go to University of Michigan. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right. So, when you're at an HBCU, you are family. They're going to make sure, they want you to be in a place where you're supported. And they were like, Kelly, you got to accept it to University of Iowa. Iowa was giving PhDs to Black people. 4 of us have PhDs from Iowa. They are going, now this was 20 years later. Is that necessarily the case? Not sure, but that's how invested the faculty are in you. And so if you talk about building bridges, particularly from minority serving institutions, those faculty, and HBCUs in particular, they are invested in their students, and they want them to succeed. And they don't want their students to go off somewhere where they're going to be set up for failure. And so I think this is the problem that we've had with establishing and growing some of these collaborative models. I know, Jessica, you were at Fisk, and it's like the Fisk Vanderbilt model. There's kind of one-offs. I mean, for us to gain this momentum, there's a level of trust that has to be there. And that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. And I'm not a panelist. I'm supposed to just ask the questions, but Dr. Nash is completely correct about that. It's all about developing trust and building relationships. And importantly, as Jessica touched on, the student is there to attain the degree, the PhD. They're going there to finish the program. And me personally, as an HBCU faculty member, I'm not going to send my students anywhere unless I know that they're going to go and get the experience that they need to get. And the way that you develop that is by visiting our institution, or actually coming to me and talking to me, or talking to my students at posters or those types of presentations. Because yeah, there are more people that are extremely serious and really able and capable of building those types of bridges than you would imagine. So for the faculty on the HBCU side, they take it not only seriously because of the outcome of the student, but also like you're not the only game in town, and that needs to be publicized a little bit more. So I'll be quiet and I'll ask the next question. But thank you, Dr. Nash, for saying that.
Before you move forward, I wanted to add, it does, like they were saying, the trust has to be there. So I can think of, some longstanding programs and then some new ones. Brown and Tougaloo have had a longstanding collaboration relationship where students from Tougaloo College in Mississippi go and do their advanced degrees at Brown University in Rhode Island. And so that trust is there. And also those students can talk to alumni who've been there, who've gone through that program. And then there's a new program between Howard and Johns Hopkins University. I guess I only read about my alma maters. Between Howard and Johns Hopkins, where they're establishing a health physics or medical physics program. And I think that this is the way that you do it, because now Hopkins is going to have access to students who are already, experienced with the program. So I think setting up these types of collaborations is not always easy, but it's definitely possible.
I just wanted to add, this is such a great question. Back to the resources, bring resources. I say this example all the time, and don't judge me because I don't remember what the experiment was, but there was an experiment that we did in the lab that we were watching it on a video because we didn't have the resources to bring in the actual equipment, but I know someone at a more wealthy institute would have that. So their knowledge about that particular concept, but I don't remember what it was at the moment, is different. So bring in resources and also know this is not a one-time thing. I think about my work as an outreach specialist. The one fundamental thing we learned, you have to build relationships and ask the people, what do you need? It's a bully to go in and say, I'm going to bring X, Y, and Z resources. This is what it has to look like. And they're looking at you like, this is not what I need. So going, listening, and willing to be in a long-term relationship with the organizations and the university, HBCUs that you're developing.
Okay, awesome. And then, so there's another question that has to do with resources. So specifically, can the panelists touch on how the lack of legacy/family economic resources impacts the sense of belonging and the sense of belonging and for success in physics?
Yep, I love that question. I think that's a good follow-up question. And to what Jessica was saying, I was going to say, this is not, when we think about resources, we think about, fellowships, we think about, some of the, sometimes we get in the box of, okay, we have a lab, we have a research project for the student to do. There are certain resources, when we talk about the wealth gap in the African-American community, or, if you think about our Latinx colleagues and their wealth gap, I can't tell you how many students I've had to go and I'm like, you got accepted to this school. Now let's talk about what are they going to provide to you? You're bringing a fellowship with you, especially if you bring a fellowship. You need some expenses to help you move. All right. There are some hurdles. I have students that I have, when I was a graduate advisor of record in my department, and for our program, they're like, oh, well, students start in August, the first paycheck is in October. And I was like, no, that doesn't work. Not everyone has a family that can support them. So I think we have to think holistically about what are all the resources that we need to provide students the tools to succeed. right? And so I think I love that question when we talk about what are the resources that we need to provide students.
Yeah, I want to add the same. I was struggling. There were days when I was finished paying in graduate school, finished paying off my apartment, getting food, and had $20 left. I don't, like I told you, my dad said you're either going to the military, you're getting scholarships. Even though he has a stable job, he didn't have money. There's three of us. He didn't have money to send me off to college. And so things like that are huge gaps, like getting to school, having to down deposit. We often don't have those resources. And so being mindful, again, it's back to resources, providing those resources to your students. I was struggling, but I'm so grateful that I was able to get 2 degrees and they were full scholarships, but it didn't mean I still didn't struggle throughout. Like there still was other needs that I had. And even when I was going to Duke University, my first internship, they initially said I had to pay my own way. I didn't have money. I didn't have a job. And luckily they worked it out and they were able to pay my way. And an uncle of mine was able to send me money that would have covered the cost. But those are barriers, travel barriers. And let me just say too, also not just for students, but even professionally, when I was an adult and got a job, a 9 to 5 and had benefits, I still couldn't pay, like I couldn't afford at the time, I'll be real transparent. I couldn't afford at the time often to be reimbursed to get money for hotel rooms, for airplane. They're good at quickly doing it, but that's an expense that's hard when you don't have money or you don't come from generational wealth.
I thank you, Jessica, for saying that. I'm sorry, because I'm just going to add on real quick, Jamie, because being in academia, I mean, we think about people well, first of all, Black people and women don't negotiate enough to begin with, and industry, but academia, like if you're trying to fix and get more African-American women in academia, like that's one easy fix. Put more money on the table. There should not be a negotiation. You should think about what's the highest salary and offer that to any candidate of color that you're trying to bring to your university.
Yeah, I was going to add that access to an emergency fund would be very useful. In this past 2 years, of course, during COVID, we've seen an uptick in requests that come in for emergencies. Like we had a student who was in Minnesota, and when the riots happened, she's not from Minnesota, she's from a whole, small town. She wanted to get out of the city, and she needed some assistance to get to her sister's house. We've had students who get a surprise balloon bill the week before graduation, and they can pay it back, but they can't pay it right now. So access to, a structured emergency fund and a process for doing that. I know that the APS has an emergency fund through their NMC program. And so we do direct students there when we can, but we've done a lot of emergency funding. And we even saw a student who did a GoFundMe to get to her NASA summer internship. This is before COVID, because they weren't going to pay her until 4 weeks into the internship, but she had to travel, she had to get an apartment and everything. So
yeah, living
just being
expenses.
mindful of those things.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Society of Physics Students also has an emergency scholarship fund to assist students with just those types of things. So yeah, that's a really important thing. And we found that as well in the Team Up report, not only the problem of not having the funding, but the stress that causes students is huge and impacts mental health. So that's a really important thing. And I'm sure we'll probably have a webinar on that at some point. Thomas, did you want to ask a question or?
Oh yeah, so there's a good question here. Each speaker has stressed the importance of community cultivating their sense of belonging in physics. What are some of the ways in which someone who is the only African-American woman in their department can find a supportive community? And I think there's multiple ways, so please.
Well, I'm going to start out by saying to connect with AAWIP, we do have a private Facebook group where a lot of informal and formal mentoring goes on. We have everyone we have a few high schoolers, we have undergraduates, graduate students, professionals. So we will welcome you to connect with us there. Or you can connect through our, excuse me, through the webpage. And if you have a specific question, then we'll put you in contact with the people that might be able to help you. But I would remind you that almost every African-American woman in physics is the only one in her department, with the exception of a few HBCUs.
I wanted to add, I'm glad we brought this up. I meant to mention it when I was doing my introduction, but this sense of loneliness and lack of belonging, we're able to meet and it's magical at our conferences, but then you leave and then you're all alone. And I don't know if you're on social media, get on Twitter. Let me tell you, Twitter is popping with all the Black in STEM. You just put in there, hashtag Black in STEM. We will find you, we will support you, we'll DM you, but that drives the work that I do. It's in these in-between times when you go back and you're having a hard day, as Dr. Nash is talking about, like when she had her people that she can go to and talk to, like we're here, we're out here, but definitely if you're not on Twitter, I would say go to the Twitterverse and all the resources that we were saying earlier. And there's places like Vanguard STEM who are creating this virtual hyperspace to include, have a space for us to vent and to talk, but we're out here. If you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter. There's so much good it could be overwhelming a little times, but there's so much good and support that's happening there. So it is lonely.
So I think we have time for just one more question, and I'm sad about that because we have so many really great questions. There was a question here, which I think is an important one. Thank you so much for your stories, your journeys and your experiences. And similar to the questions that are being asked, the student wants to know, what are some ways that non-Black students can support and advocate for their peers?
Use your privilege. Use your privilege and be supportive. I know that sounds so cliche, but let me give you examples. I mentioned at Vanderbilt, it was very competitive, but there were some older postdoc students who really took me underneath their wing, who were willing to sit down with me and go on the board and go over all the questions and created a space for me. They also, in my career, I think about other colleagues that I had, they knew what I was passionate about. I think about when I'm talking to you about the networks, there in my field, well, in astronomy, there were only 2 Black astronomers that I saw constantly that were at AAS, that were in SVP, and they inspired me, but I always knew I could go to them. If I were ever in a pinch, and if I ever was in trouble, I knew I could do the call, like come help me. But I would say use your privilege. And so so one thing I want to say to the students that are on here who want to help your other students, hear from them, ask them what they want, what do they want to do? And when you hear opportunities, even if you want to do that talk, yeah, I believe in getting the bag, but you really want to do that talk, but you know your Black student or your Black friend really wants to do that, they'd be great at it, give it to them. It doesn't take anything from you. There can be other opportunities, and understand that you may get 20 and think, well, I'm getting 20, everyone else may be getting 20. It's not the case. So leverage small things like that, hear what they're invested, and seek opportunities for them to, if it's outreach, if it's speaking engagements, if it's travel engagements, if it's just an introduction. That's one thing I love, and people know this about me, I'm a networker. So I'm trying to connect you to her, to him. And so just listening out for opportunities. It takes nothing from you to be a networker and connect them to your resources and to your connects that you have.
Thank you, Jessica.
I would say to be an upstander, I think that's the right word, not a bystander, because you may be in many rooms that they're not in. And when they're not in that room, stand up for them. Like sometimes you might hear an off-color joke. Let other people around you know that that's not okay around you, even if, no one who might have been insulted by the joke is around. Just kind of, save the space for them.
Really important. Kelly, did you want to add something, or you're?
I'm over here looking at all these awesome questions. They're amazing.
So many great questions.
So many great questions, but no, I just want to, I just want to just give some hope to the audience. I know we have a lot of young people. I see we have some folks that are in academia and in some of those places of privilege where they can make some decisions. And I just want to say, definitely young people are bringing all kind of energy to academia, the ones that are in here, and they have high expectations for inclusion. And I see that across, the spectrum, not just among minorities. And so I think it's the duty of the senior people participating here today to definitely make that space and make it inclusive. And that's all I want to say.
Well, thank you. So I think we have come to the end of our time. If anyone has 30 seconds that they want to say anything last minute.
I just want to
go ahead.
Real quick. I do want to encourage the next generation that is coming up behind me. I know there's a lot of us here, even in this room, that have laid a pathway for those to come up. Keep being yourself. Keep saying no to the environment that you don't want to be a part of. We see you. I may not reply to every single thing, but I'm seeing you. I'm supporting you. You are seen, you're heard, you're valued. Keep bringing that swag to what we're doing. We're going to make this change. I know it sounds a lot of doom and gloom here, but I have to have hope that there will be a change. There will be a day where we'll stop hearing the first. I'm ready to hear the 200th person that has gotten a degree in our field. So there's hope out there, and know that you are not alone.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much. Well, we are at the end of our time, which is very sad because this was really phenomenal. I want to thank our amazing speakers for sharing their experiences, their insight, their advice. I would like to thank my co-host, Thomas Searles. I want to thank our exceedingly competent staff, Vanessa Bridges and Benita Thomas, for helping to make this webinar run smoothly. And we thank, of course, our partners for co-sponsoring this webinar. But last but not least, I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in, for sticking with us, and for asking such thoughtful questions. The webinar has been recorded, and the recording will be up in a day or so. If you'd like to be notified of the next webinar, which is currently scheduled for early November, on where we'll explore physics identity, please sign up on our webpage for Team Up updates, or you can check the Team Up webinar page directly. Finally, following this webinar, you will receive a survey, and I ask you to please fill out the survey so that we can continue to provide quality programming to you. So once again, thank you to all of you. This was really phenomenal, and thank you for making our inaugural webinar so great. And to everyone else, have a great day.